What if I told you? Formula One drivers just lost up to 50 kilometers per hour in the middle of a straight without lifting the throttle? Because that's exactly what happened in Suzuka. And it wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a failure. It was the rules. Just hours before qualifying, the FIA made a sudden change, cutting energy from 9 to 8 megajoules, trying to fix a problem that was already out of control. But instead of fixing it, they exposed something much worse. Cars slowing down unpredictably. Drivers unable to attack. World champions saying they can't even trust what the car will do next. And one of them said it clearly. This is not racing anymore. At the same time, fans around the world started noticing something strange. Cars braking on straights. Overtakes that made no sense. Speed disappearing, for no visible reason. And within minutes, the internet exploded. Millions of views. Global trends. People asking the same question. What happened to Formula One? But here's the part nobody expected. When fans started calling it out, the sport tried to hide it. And that's when this stopped being just a technical issue and became a full-blown crisis. Because now it's not just drivers against the rules. It's drivers, fans, and reality itself. And if you stay until the end, you'll understand why Suzuka might be the moment Formula One went too far. Subscribe now, because this story only gets more controversial from here. Before the chaos, there was a warning. Quiet, technical, easy to ignore. But inside the paddock, everyone felt it coming. Because this wasn't a new problem. It had been building since the very first race of the season. And every weekend, it was getting worse. Australia showed the first signs. Cars behaving strangely on the straights. Overtakes that didn't look real. Not earned. Just happening. At first, people thought it was strategy. Then China made it clearer. Drivers frustrated. Gaps that made no sense. And one message repeated over and over again. The car is not giving me what I need. Not grip. Not balance. Energy. And that's where everything starts to connect. Because under the 2026 regulations, energy is no longer just part of performance. It is performance. How you harvest it. How you deploy it. How your system decides when to give it back. All of that now defines your lap. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Drivers are no longer fully in control. They are managing a system. A system that sometimes decides for them. And Suzuka exposed that brutally. But here's the detail that changed everything that weekend. The FIA already knew. They had seen the data. They had heard the complaints. They understood that something wasn't working. So they acted. Fast. Too fast. They reduced the energy limit for qualifying, trying to smooth out the behavior. Less energy to manage. Less extreme deployment. More consistency. That was the idea. But what actually happened was very different. Because by reducing the total energy available, they increased the pressure on how it was used. Now every corner mattered more. Every braking zone. Every micro decision inside the system. And suddenly, drivers weren't just racing the track. They were racing the software. Trying to predict what the car would do next. And this is where the first real frustration appears. Because when you enter a corner at high speed, you expect one thing. Consistency. You expect the car to behave the same way, every lap. But in Suzuka, that wasn't happening. Sometimes the power was there. Sometimes it wasn't. Same corner. Same speed. Different result. And that's where confidence disappears. Not slowly. Instantly. Because confidence in Formula One is built on predictability. And Ferrari wasn't the only team feeling it. Red Bull. McLaren. Even teams further down the grid. Everyone was dealing with the same core issue. But not equally. And that's what made it even worse. Because some teams had figured it out better. Their energy systems were smoother, more efficient, more predictable, while others were fighting the car every lap. And that created something very dangerous. An uneven playing field, not based on driving, but on system behavior. And drivers knew it. They could feel it. And they started saying it. Some directly, some carefully. But the message was the same. This is not entirely in our hands anymore. And once that idea enters the paddock, everything changes. Because Formula One has always been about pushing limits. But those limits were supposed to be human. Now, they're algorithmic. And Suzuka was the first time it became impossible to ignore. Because when qualifying started, all those hidden problems came to the surface at once. And then, qualifying begins. This is where everything should become clear. Grip improves. Track evolution kicks in. Drivers push harder. Cars get faster. That's how it's supposed to work. But in Suzuka, something felt off immediately. The first laps go out. And instead of clean, predictable runs, you see hesitation, small corrections, drivers adjusting mid-corner, not attacking, managing. And that's the first sign. Because in Formula 1, when drivers stop attacking, it means something is wrong. But here's where it becomes impossible to ignore. On the straights, cars start losing speed. Not gradually, not naturally, abruptly, full throttle. And then suddenly, nothing. Power drops, momentum fades, and the driver can't do anything about it. This is super clipping. And now, everyone can see it. Not just engineers, not just drivers, everyone. Because it's happening in the most visible place on the track, the straight. And this changes everything. Because when a car slows down on a straight, it breaks the logic of racing. It feels wrong. It looks wrong. And for the driver, it's even worse. Because you're committed, flat out, expecting maximum performance. And instead, you get unpredictability. And this is where frustration turns into anger. Lap after lap, the same pattern. Strong in some sections, weak in others. And not because of driving, because of energy, because of the system. And now the drivers are no longer just reacting. They're questioning. You can hear it in the radios. Short messages, controlled tone. But underneath, clear frustration. Why is the power not there? Why is it different this lap? Why can't I push? And here's the part that makes it even more intense. This is qualifying. 1 lap, maximum attack. No saving, no management. This is where drivers should feel most in control. But instead, this is where they feel it the least. And that contradiction is what triggers everything that comes next. Because once drivers realize they cannot rely on the car in the most important moment, the mindset changes. They stop trusting. They start compensating. They overthink. They hesitate. And in a sport decided by thousandths of a second, that's everything. But here's where the story splits again. Some drivers adapt. They accept the limitation. They work around it. Others fight it, push against it. And that's where mistakes begin. Tiny ones, but costly. A missed apex. A fraction too early on throttle. A lift where there shouldn't be one. All because the car isn't behaving consistently. And now qualifying is no longer about perfection. It's about damage control. And that's something drivers hate more than anything. Because they know, this isn't the limit of their talent. It's the limit of the system. And once that realization settles in, the frustration doesn't stay inside the car. It comes out. In interviews. In statements. In tone. And what they start saying after the session is what truly shakes the sport. Because for the first time, multiple drivers are not just criticizing performance. They're questioning the rules themselves. And once that line is crossed, there is no going back. And then, the drivers started talking. Not carefully. Not diplomatically. Honestly. And that's when everything changed. Because what came after qualifying was not normal. Max Verstappen didn't try to soften it. He didn't look for excuses. He said the car moves in a way he cannot trust. That he cannot attack. That this is simply the reality now. And when a driver like him says he can't attack, that's not frustration. That's a red flag. But here's where it spreads. Because it wasn't just one driver. Lando Norris took it even further. Calm, analytical, but direct. He said the problem is not just the rules. It's that performance now depends too much on how well teams manage energy through software. Not driving. Not skill. Software. And that changes the entire foundation of the sport. Because if performance is decided by code, then what exactly is the driver controlling? Now listen carefully, because this is where it gets uncomfortable. Fernando Alonso didn't talk about lap time. He didn't talk about position. He talked about what it feels like inside the car. Drivers are looking at the steering wheel, more than the track, managing energy, watching numbers, instead of racing. And in that moment, the criticism stops being technical. It becomes something much bigger. Identity. What is this sport supposed to be? But here's the twist. Because not everyone is suffering equally. And that's what makes it even more explosive. George Russell, who is at the front, admitted something subtle. Even when it works for you, seeing cars suddenly lose speed feels wrong. Unnatural. And that word matters. Because Formula 1 has always been extreme, but never unnatural. Now, it is. And this is where the tension reaches its peak. Because while drivers are openly questioning the system, the FIA is still trying to control it, adjust it, refine it, without admitting the core issue. They say it needs time. They say teams will adapt. They say the balance will come. But the drivers are no longer fully convinced. And once that doubt exists, it spreads. From one driver, to another, to the entire grid. Because every single one of them felt it in Suzuka. That moment. Full throttle. No power. No control. And no explanation that satisfies them. But here's the part that makes this even bigger. Because what happens inside the paddock doesn't stay there anymore. Fans saw it too. They saw cars slowing down. They saw drivers struggling. They saw something that didn't look like racing. And they reacted. Loudly. Globally. Relentlessly. And suddenly, this is no longer a private frustration. It's public pressure. On the FIA. On the teams. On the sport itself. And now Formula One is facing something it cannot easily control. Because technical problems can be fixed. Performance gaps can be closed. But perception is much harder to change. Because once fans start asking, is this still real racing? That question doesn't disappear. It grows. And Suzuka was the moment that question became impossible to ignore.